Hello, everybody. We're back with another episode of Two Nerds Talking. I'm Jeremy, and with me is Alicia. And today
Yo.
we are talking about movie culture, specifically movie remakes. And I know Alicia is a really big film buff, and she has a lot to say on that. So I'm going to let her get the topic started.
So being I've been a movie buff most of my life. I was raised on just about almost every genre of film you can think of. And what genres I wasn't exposed to naturally growing up, I got introduced to in college. I'm a, or I was rather, a film arts major at college, and I have, because of my experiences, I have uh, gained a lot of knowledge and a lot of information on Hollywood and um, the adaptations of pre-existing IPs and the whole history behind that. But it goes even further than that. I'm not just a movie buff. I'm also a bookworm. I've been reading for almost as long as I've been watching movies. And it also helps that I'm a little bit of a gamer on the side, so I've got my hands and my feet in basically three different spheres of entertainment. And the thing about the film industry is it crosses all of those spheres and then some. There is a lot of cross pollination between the gaming industry, the literature industry, and movie making. All three of these main um, entertainment fields and industries, they all take from each other and vice versa. So the thing about mainstream Hollywood in particular and their adaptations of pre-existing IPs is a lot of people like to bag on the current state of readaptations, reboots, remakes, and the like. And it's very trendy to talk about how trash they are now, and many, if not all of them, are very rightly deserved. But I think a lot of people are treating this trend of adaptations as something fairly new when it's not. If you do research into the history of the film arts, uh, the filmmaking industry has been doing adaptations of pre-existing IPs pretty much since the beginning of film as we know it. Going back to the early days of cinema. So we're talking like the silent era. We're talking like the late 1800s, early 1900s. Some of the very first movies that we have on record were actually adaptations of pre-existing IPs, mainly books. So one of the earliest adaptations of Alice in Wonderland, for example, I can't remember the exact date, but it's something like 1910 or 1908. And then, of course, we have the infamous adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is Nosferatu, which was, what was it, 1920 something, 1928?
I believe it was the early 20s. It has something, like 100 years on it.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea of Hollywood adapting from something that has already been in existence for a long time is not new. I think why people are so tired of readaptations and remakes and reboots is because for a very long time in Hollywood, these adaptations of pre-existing IPs weren't the norm. They weren't particularly very common. Even back during the early days of Hollywood, even during the silent era, uh, adaptations weren't particularly common in the way that they are now, because the mainstream Hollywood and the filmmaking industry and the television making industry has been inundated and oversaturated with this level of adaptation. And excuse me, that's my baby squealing at me.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree a lot with that. And I would also add that I think another reason that people are as tired of remakes as they are is because of the fact that in the past, whenever a remake or an adaptation was made, whether it was a book being turned into a movie or just an old movie being remade, the point of doing such a thing was to do something that you couldn't do in the past. As much as we love older movies, as much as they're important to film history, movies from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they couldn't do things that films today can do. That's just a fact. So when you remake a film from that era, you're actually adding something to it that couldn't be added to it back then. You're expressing it in a different way. But when you remake something that was made in the early 2000s, like, say, Harry Potter or something, there's
How to Train
literally
Your Dragon.
yeah, there's like literally no point in that. Why would you
No.
remake anything that was made after the 2000s or even the 80s or 90s for that matter? Like, if you're going to be remaking a movie, I feel like that movie should be way far back in the past because in the past 40 years or so, what we can actually do with movies hasn't changed enough to justify them being reinvented, in my opinion.
Right, exactly. Uh, Remaking a movie from like the 70s, 60s, 50s, even as recently as the 80s is one thing.
Mhm.
But when you are so far gone with ideas that you're starting to pull IPs from like the late 90s, early 2000s, 2010s, and like you're remaking those, you've got to ask yourself, is there really nothing else out there? Like number one, there's I can name just on my one hand alone the number of pre-existing IPs that have never been touched by Hollywood that are begging for either a reboot or a flat out brand new adaptation, you know. And nobody will touch those and they're perfectly good stories. Um I mean right off the top of my head, Anne of Green Gables. The Anne of Green Gables franchise has never been adapted into like a full-length feature movie since I want to say at least maybe the 60s or 70s. The most well-known adaptation is a Canadian miniseries produced by Sullivan Entertainment in the 80s
Mhm.
and early 90s. And don't even get me started on the Netflix adaptation. I can literally make a whole TNT episode about how awful and how bastardized the Netflix adaptation of Anne of Green Gables is. So, and then what else? You have the rest of the Chronicles of Narnia franchise that has yet to be adapted. You
Yeah.
have mainstream Hollywood adapted the first three movies in the franchise. And actually, that's kind of the history with the Chronicles of Narnia adaptations. Only the first three books in the franchise have ever been adapted, both for TV and for film. None of the other books in the franchise have ever been touched. And then you have like the inheritance cycle. Eragon was the only book in that franchise that ever got adapted, and the other three books are more than deserving of a new adaptation. But no, Hollywood and the entertainment industry doesn't want to touch those untapped IPs. You know, you have a remake of How to Train Your Dragon, and How to Train Your Dragon, the last entry in the original franchise is less than 10 years old,
Right.
and they're doing a remake of the Harry Potter franchise. And the last movie in that series was released, um, what was it? Less than 10 years ago as well, or
Oh,
something to the effect.
it was actually a
So
little over 10 years ago. It was in
a little over
2012.
10 years.
But
Yeah,
the
exactly.
point to that being is that Harry Potter was a cutting edge series for its time, and it still completely holds up today. There's absolutely nothing the series is going to gain from a remake other than being reinvented in ways that the studio would like to reinvent it. That's just a fact. And,
Which is absolute ridiculousness. It's called being a cash cow.
Yeah.
you
I
know.
mean, like, Warner Brothers knows that they could try to make a new IP, but the chances of it being as influential and making the level of money that Harry Potter would are slim to none. So, a remake, when they can take a property that is already well known and loved by many and just, put it out there again, like what they're doing with Harry Potter, that's a much safer bet to making money than actually making something new and being creative is. Because right
Right. And
now, Hollywood is going through a really odd time because we're living in a time where, thanks to things like streaming services and stuff, they're super convenient. We have thousands of movies at our fingertips constantly. People aren't really going to the theaters anymore like they used to. So movies,
no,
by and large, aren't really making the cuts that they used to.
no, they're not, because Hollywood doesn't know its audience anymore. I mean, let's be honest. Hollywood does not know its audience anymore. They've completely lost the plot when it comes to what audiences are interested in. See, it used to be, I look at trends in Hollywood, and I look at them over periods of years and decades. And for a very long time, it used to be that Hollywood, mainstream Hollywood in general, would go with the flow of what was trendy for their audience at any given time. When Star Wars first came out in theaters in the 70s, if you look, there was movie after movie after movie cashing in on the Star Wars franchise. Now, none of them ever really got big like Star Wars. Probably really the only exception would be Spaceballs. But Spaceballs was a parody of Star Wars. And in my personal opinion, it's probably the best parody of Star Wars. Have you seen Spaceballs?
I haven't seen all of it, but I need to sit down and watch it because it just came on randomly on a streaming service one day, and that first scene of it really did have me laughing.
You
Um,
have to watch all of Spaceballs.
yeah,
It really is the best parody of the Star Wars franchise that has actually made a name for itself.
yeah,
Um
yeah.
but anyway, and then you have the rise in the fantasy craze in Hollywood. When the Lord of the Rings, the Chronicles of Narnia, and the Harry Potter franchise all were releasing movies at or around the same time as each other, and there was this inundation of uh, more or less lesser known fantasy movies that tried to ride the heels of The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and the Chronicles of Narnia. You know.
Yeah.
So, you had movies like, what was that? Inkheart, um, the Artemis that never really got off the ground. Neither Inkheart nor the Artemis franchise ever really got off the ground. But that's, to my understanding, the source material was not treated well. And you can definitely see that with the Artemis Fowl franchise. The movie that was released did not do well.
Yeah.
It was not done well, and the material was treated very poorly. If they had treated the Artemis Fowl material with more respect, we could have had probably another semi-major fantasy franchise on our hands. Um, the only other exception has been the Percy Jackson franchise, has had some popularity in its adaptations over time.
Mhm.
So, but that's only because the studios that handled the Percy Jackson franchise actually treated the material with some modicum of respect and actually took it a little bit seriously. But when I talk about trends and how Hollywood generally follows the trends of its audience over the course of time, the later we get into history and the closer we get to the present, the more and more you see mainstream Hollywood starting to ignore the interests of their audience members. And
Yeah.
it starts to become no longer about the audience. It now starts to become about, what the shareholders want, what the board of directors want, what the CEOs want. How much can they fit their hands in each other's pockets? It's no longer about what the audience wants. Case in classic point, look at what Marvel has done to its franchise. And look
Oh,
at how the audience is so damn tired of Marvel movies now. Marvel was huge. I
mhm.
was a part of the Marvel fan base for years. I'm still a big fan of like the Phase 1 and Phase 2 and a little bit of Phase 3 Marvel Universe. I was a fan from day one when Captain America came out, all the way to Avengers Endgame.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, I was that big a fan of the Marvel franchise for that long. And the fact that it went for that long is a testament to not only how well they adapted the comics and how well they treated the characters, but how much audience members really liked the Marvel franchise. But then after Endgame finished, and a lot of like the characters that we had attached ourselves to, like Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, um, the Hulk, their stories ended, and people started to get they kind of started to get a little tired of the Marvel franchise. And the studio that handled it, Disney, was they weren't listening to their audience members. When
Yeah.
the next movie that came out after Endgame bombed like a tank, well, in comparison to Endgame, that should have been the first note to Disney that, hey, you know, maybe the comic book franchise is kind of starting to set sail and maybe we need to kind of phase out Marvel and do something different.
Well, the thing
No, they didn't do that.
is, I like to have crossovers. I think the MCU on paper is a really cool ideal, but the problem with it is that they just want to keep milking it forever, whether the content they have to put in it is good or not. The Marvel movies that have come out since Endgame, for the most part, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, they have been like bad filler episodes in an anime, basically,
Yeah,
where they're
you're
just
right.
making them for the sake of making them, and there's no story, like Eternals or Multiverse of Madness. Those two movies were so boring. I was praying for them to end. Like
Mm.
I could not bear to watch them. They were so boring. Now, the two good ones were Spider-Man No Way Home and
Yeah,
then Guardians of the Galaxy. Those were two
yeah,
movies that were still good. But if I were Disney, what I would have done instead of just continuing to relentlessly milk Marvel after Endgame is I would have said, well, we need to slow down for a while. Maybe we'll do a Marvel movie every 2 years, or maybe we'll just do a Marvel movie whenever we have an actual good story to write, but we can't just continue to constantly put Marvel movies out despite the fact that the story is clearly over. But Disney just couldn't do that. There was too much money to be had. They were too greedy.
right. And now the general audiences are starting to get really tired of the Marvel franchise because Disney has run that name so deep into the ground that they're now starting to get sick of not just Marvel itself, but like comic book superhero adaptations in general. Since Endgame, almost with exception, as you said, like No Way Home and, you know, the Guardians franchise, but almost every superhero or comic book adaptation that has come out since Endgame has not done the numbers that Marvel of the old age did. And I'm also referring to like DC. When you consider how like we could do a whole other episode on how awfully DC has handled their own quote unquote multiverse because they've had start after start after start. They tried desperately to get their multiverse off the ground and they can't do it. And everybody, you know, thought that James Gunn was going to be their saving grace for DC. And I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've heard a lot of mixed opinions on James Gunn's adaptation of Superman. I've heard a lot of people say that he didn't treat Superman's character seriously enough. I heard a lot of people say that it was pushing a political agenda where if you know anything about Superman as a character, he doesn't push a political agenda. Superman at his core as a character has no political allegiance, he has no political agenda. He is for the justice and equality of people everywhere. And it's my understanding that this new Superman that James Gunn directed heavily pushes a political agenda. And
Right,
a lot of people who are Superman fans don't take kindly to that.
right. And it's
So
my
it's not
personal
it's
opinion
not
that
just
like superheroes should mostly be left out of modern politics, in my opinion, because modern politics are just too divisive. And, you know, a superhero, their main creed that they live by should be that everybody is of equal worth. Uh, you know, in the eyes of God or just in the eyes of basic morality, because I know that some people don't see them as Christian figures, but I know a lot of them have Christian undertones. Um,
oh, it
but
goes even further than that. I can get
it,
into the nitty gritty about the origins of both Superman and Captain America.
yeah, but
Superman.
to basically
Go ahead.
summarize, it should basically just be a thing where they're not concerned with politics. They should just be concerned with the well-being of everybody. That's what I think.
Right, exactly. And to use a comic book character as a poster child for whatever agenda you're trying to push is honestly a character assassination of that character.
Yeah,
Because if the original creator's intent for that comic book character was to be like agenda neutral or apolitical, and then you use that character as a poster child for whatever idea you're trying to push, you're not being honest and you're not being true to the adaptation of that character.
yeah,
And I
exactly.
think a lot of people, a lot of general audiences are really starting to get tired of that,
Mhm.
about how these beloved characters that have been around for generations now are being treated. And a lot of people are just they're tired of um comic book characters and superheroes being misused that way. And they're tired of long-running franchises like Marvel and Batman and Superman, and they're getting tired of either seeing like the same face on screen, or they're getting tired of seeing the same ideas recycled, or they're getting tired of whatever agenda the studio is trying to push. And mainstream Hollywood has become so tone deaf that it's not even about the audience anymore. I really do believe that mainstream Hollywood really no longer cares about its audience, because if they really truly cared about their audience, they would have ended the Marvel franchise after Endgame. I really believe that. They would have ended the Marvel franchise after Endgame if
or
they
at
really cared about it.
least or at least put it into hibernation long enough to develop a story that was actually worth telling.
That is very true. You make a good point. If
Yeah,
Disney really wanted to continue the Marvel franchise and have it be consistently good and well received with each movie they release, they would have taken at minimum a 5-year break from
yeah,
Endgame. At minimum a 5-year break to
yeah,
come up with an adaptation of like a character we've never seen before, or maybe an adaptation of a storyline that was not touched in phase one or phase two or phase three, and adapt that. I was doing a little bit of research into the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, and there's a lot in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise that is not even touched upon in any of the three movies. With the exception of the third movie. The third movie is an origin story for Rocket's character, but when you compare Rocket's origin story in the movies to his origin story in the comics, they're actually not the same thing. His origin story in the comics is very different from his origin story in the movie. And then there's this whole subplot that like years and years and years after Thanos, this is in the comics. Years and years after the big snap and then like the Infinity Stones are like destroyed and like everything goes back to normal. I can't remember exactly how the storyline goes, but like a really huge threat crops up again. But by this time, all of like the original like Avengers characters are either dead or they've gone into hiding. And Rocket Raccoon is one of the central characters in this new storyline. But because of his heavy genetic engineering and modification, his body is literally starting to deteriorate. And when you see Rocket's character in this new timeline, he's literally on life support. He's so old and he's so frail. But he's one of the central characters in this new story arc. And he's brought out of retirement to fight this new evil yet again. That, in my personal opinion, is a wonderful new story. That's a wonderful new way to take the Guardians of the Galaxy in a new direction and a new story. I would love to see an adaptation of that and somebody do something with that storyline.
Yeah, I would love to as well. I don't know if they're actually going to go that direction. All I know is that the third movie ended with the message that Star-Lord will return. So eventually there's going to be another movie about the Star-Lord himself. But I don't know. I think that would be a good subplot to include in it.
I don't think that's going to happen, though.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to revisit Guardians of the Galaxy. And
Well,
if they
they've
do,
actually already confirmed that they are going to make a fourth movie.
but what's it going to involve? Because when you consider, like, if you really want to take, and I don't know how seriously Disney is going to treat this, if you really want to take Deadpool Volume 3 seriously, um, all of the multiverse has been wiped out. Like, if you want to consider what happened in Deadpool 3 canon to the entire Marvel universe, the multiverse has been wiped out. There is no more multiverse in the Marvel franchise. So how are you going to reconcile everything that's happened to the Guardians in a fourth movie where that reality has basically been wiped clean from existence? If you're going to take Deadpool seriously and make it canon.
Well, I think that like now I'm not an expert on this, so I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Deadpool is considered maybe like semi-canon at best, but I don't think it's canon in the same way that all the other Marvel movies are, right?
Oh no, it's going to be canon. You know how I know?
What?
Because Deadpool is going to appear in the new Doomsday movie. Avengers Doomsday, he's going to make an appearance in that movie.
Well, I feel like he'll have to be massively toned down for one big reason. Disney likes to keep the mainstream Marvel movies PG-13 because when a movie is rated R, that drastically limits how you can advertise it and it drastically limits the potential viewer base because a lot of families don't show up to the movie and stuff like that. And also, people just don't want to be carded to go see the movie if it's rated R. So, Disney will fight tooth and nail to keep their mainstream Marvel movies PG-13 rated. So, if Deadpool is in the movie, he's going to be like drastically toned down.
He's basically going to be muzzled
Yeah.
because you can't have a character like Deadpool be in a movie as serious as the Avengers and
Uh-huh.
not have him pop. The only thing that I will say is I really wish that Tony Stark weren't dead in universe because can you imagine Tony Stark and Deadpool going against each other? Like the amount of sass and the amount of back talking between those two
Oh
would be
gosh.
on a level that has never been seen in all of like Hollywood history ever. Like it would be galactic. Like
Yeah.
this would be iconic if
Well, now
Tony
if
Stark
he
was still alive in the universe and he met Deadpool. Can you even imagine?
if if Deadpool is in Doomsday, then I would 100% say that that's probably going to be like a lot of the joke. He's going to be wishing that he could give more sass to people. He's going to be wishing that he could drop F-bombs, but he's going to have to stick to more PG-13 insults because I think when it comes to a PG-13 movie, they're only allowed to have like one F word or something, and that'll
Mhm.
probably be used on Deadpool. Like he'll probably make a joke
Oh,
about the fact that he
100%.
used the one F word that they're allowed.
Oh, hold on. No, no, no. You know what would be even funnier than that? Is if
What?
that one allowed F word was given to someone that's not Deadpool, and Deadpool makes a smartass comment about that.
Yeah,
Now
something
that would be funny. That would be funny, actually.
like we're
So
allowed the one F word and you don't even give it to the character that's based around being vulgar or something.
that would honestly be funny. But anyway, we got super way off topic.
Yeah.
Um, I've been yapping too long, so why don't you talk about, since you have more experience with this than I do, the state of adaptations as it relates to video games?
Well, I think when it relates to video games, the situation is very different because video games, up until very recent years, have progressed very rapidly to the point to where a video game from 20 years ago is limited in ways that a video game from today is not. The same can't be said for movies, obviously. So, like, if you take Final Fantasy VII, for example, it's a game from the late 90s. Comparing that game to the remake is night and day. The remake is able to have so much more expression. It's able to have so much more cinematic value. And we're able to experience the universe and its characters in a way that we could. And that's no knocking against the original. The original is a timeless classic, but the remake is bringing it to certain heights that the original simply couldn't. And that's why I think most of the time there is a lot more justification for remastering or remaking games than there is movies because games are still a medium that is actively progressing. And even though they've largely hit what many consider to be a graphical apex now, at least we think so, that was only very recently. So there's still so many fairly, new in terms of history, relatively new games that could be remade and given an entirely new lease on life. When you contrast that to film, remaking something like Harry Potter is just entirely pointless. And the worst offender of remakes, in my opinion, of any art form is Disney. We all know that Disney was going to remake freaking Tangled, okay? Tangled, which is a movie that still, in terms of graphics, like 3D graphics, it looks amazing to this day. There is absolutely no reason to remake that movie. It's pure lunacy that they were going to do so.
Well, they've actually stopped adaptations of previous IPs in light of how god awful the Snow White adaptation did. It
Yeah.
bombed so hard that they have put a hold on further remakes, and to my knowledge, that has not been lifted yet. Now, the
Well,
only
yeah.
reason why they came out with Lilo and Stitch is because that was already in the works. They had no choice but to release that one.
Well,
That was
Disney is in
already,
a reinventing phase because both their remakes and a lot of their animated movies are absolutely failing. Um,
yeah.
and some of that can be blamed on the pandemic, but you would think at this point that if there was a genuine interest in, their original movies or their remakes, that they would be starting to rebound by now, but they're not. If you look at the total list of movies that they've released in the past 5 years, or you can even go for the past 7 or 8 years, um, their animated movies and their remakes, by and large, have not done well. There have been a few exceptions, such as Encanto did really well, Moana 2 did really well, and the Lion King remake did really well because it's Lion King. Anything with the name Lion King does well.
I'm
Um,
eternally mad. And we could do a whole other topic. We could do a whole other TNT topic on the Lion King franchise.
but
I
apart
am a
from,
legitimate
yeah,
lifelong fan of the Lion King franchise. I know way too much about that series, like
yeah,
lore wise,
yeah,
how the first movie was made. Like I could go on a rant on
mhm,
the Lion King franchise.
right.
But anyway,
But apart from those three that I named, um, I might have missed one or two, but by and large, the vast majority of them have flopped. Movies like Luca flopped, Turning Red flopped, Elio
Elio,
flopped hard.
really
Um,
hard. Like
yeah,
it was wasn't Elio like Pixar's worst flop since Buzz Lightyear?
uh, Lightyear and Strange World are close contenders, I think, for Disney slash Pixar's biggest flops. But those three movies in particular have just done so bad. And then, of course, we know the Snow White remake, how poorly that did. So I had a very long winded way of saying that. But basically, my theory is that Disney is going to start leaning far more heavily into mature content because their family friendly content, such as their animated movies and remakes, are for the most part just not cutting it anymore. I think they're going to start leaning more heavily into things like Star Wars and Marvel because even though people are fatigued with Marvel, it's still bringing them much higher returns than their original movies are.
Right. Um, going back to video games.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, you have a little bit more experience in this than I do, since you're more into the video game community than I am. But what about like movie adaptations of video games? We've kind of seen a semi uptick in that.
Mhm.
Again, like with like old pre-existing IPs being adapted, video games being adapted into movies have been around for pretty much as long as the gaming franchise itself has been around. So
Yeah.
like you have like the adaptations of, like Mortal Kombat, Mario Bros. Um, was
Well,
Street Fighter ever adapted into a movie?
the
I know there's
movie
a new Fighter movie coming out, but wasn't there an original Street Fighter movie?
I'm not an expert on Street Fighter, but I am almost certain there was. I know there was Mortal Kombat movies. And Mortal Kombat is basically a franchise that unless you have a strong stomach, you probably don't want to see in movie form because Mortal Kombat is known for being extremely over the top gory. A lot of people don't know this, but Mortal Kombat is basically the reason the ESRB was even developed. So,
No, I think if you're a gamer worth your salt, you do know that.
um, but yeah, when it comes to movie adaptations, there's been a massive uptick in recent years in their quality. I know that the Mortal Kombat movies back in their day were very controversial. A lot of the Resident Evil movies, people have different opinions on those. People don't like to talk about the god awful 1980s Mario movie. Um, but when it comes to newer stuff, such as, let's say, the Super Mario Bros. Movie from Illumination, that movie just pleased fans and even non fans around the world. And it downright humiliated Disney, by the way, because it outperformed everything they had out at the time by massive margins.
Yeah.
Um, then, of course, you've got the Sonic movie. I know that you're not a huge fan of Jim Carrey or whatever, but those movies have massive, massive respect in the gamer community because of the respect that they pay to the games.
I
Uh,
will say I've seen enough clips and shorts from the Sonic franchise that I think I might could tolerate Jim Carrey and like actually sit down and watch it because I have not played a Sonic game yet, but I know enough about Sonic from sheer osmosis being in the gaming community so long that
Uh,
Eggman is supposed to be this very over the top, like classic Saturday morning cartoon, movie villain, which plays very much into Jim Carrey's style of acting. That's that's basically Jim Carrey right there. So
uh,
if that's what the Eggman character is, then I think I can probably, grit my teeth and not turn myself inside out and actually watch Jim Carrey in Sonic.
Well, I will say, regardless of what anyone thinks of Jim Carrey, whether they think he's a bad actor or not, or they think he's legendary, as a lot of people in movies do, um, the Sonic movie is, in my opinion, pretty much his best performance because every scene he's in is like a funny scene that I could actually call back to and remember laughing at. And there's not a lot of movies that have scenes like that where, in their totality, every single bit of them are just either funny or memorable in some way.
Right,
And the Sonic movies themselves are developed in such a way that they're meant to pay service to the fan base, but they're also completely watchable to someone who's never touched a Sonic game, which I think is great. Um,
right. I think that's how
mm,
I'm not as deep into the video game community as you are. I'm working on it.
mm,
It's just the biggest con about coming into the gaming community late because I came into the gaming community in my late teens, early 20s.
uh,
And the hardest part about getting into the gaming community that late is you don't have a base foundation for a lot of the classic games like Pokemon and Sonic and Zelda and the Mario Bros. But I've developed a basic knowledge of all of those IPs, as I said, from just basic exposure to being in the gaming community. And what I will say is if you're going to adapt a video game, because video games are a radically different medium from books, and they're a radically different medium from movies. If you're going to adapt a video game into a movie franchise, create your own story, like create your own original story. That's, I think, the reason why the Super Mario movie did so gosh darn well. Was that they took the characters, they took the universe, they changed nothing about the characters, they changed nothing about the universe to my knowledge. Bowser is still Bowser, Princess Peach is still Peach, Mario and Luigi are still Mario and Luigi. They and Donkey Kong is Donkey Kong. The world is there, the little mushroom people are there. They changed nothing about the world. What they did was they created their own unique story with those characters. They didn't do a one-to-one adaptation of a Mario Bros. Video game. They created their own story. And the thing about video games is video games are created in such a way to where if you were to adapt a video game into a movie and make it a one-to-one creation, it would not make sense. It would
yeah,
not make sense at all. And you would lose so much of the plot of the movie itself. A classic case in point is going to be Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. As much as I love Advent Children, you will not understand the movie unless you have played the original game
right, right,
because the movie is a direct tie-in to the original game. It's not a one-to-one adaptation of the original movie or the original game rather, and it's kind of a sequel to the original game, but you won't understand it unless you've played the game.
right.
So,
Well,
um, I,
the original compilation, you have the major ones. You have Before Crisis, of course, but that game isn't playable more. unfortunately. But
Yeah,
with the original compilation, you have Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII, Advent Children, and then Dirge of Cerberus. Um,
right.
yeah,
And yeah, because in that chronological order.
yeah.
Um, but and I have not seen the Uncharted movie yet. I've played like all three of the Uncharted games. Well, all three. I know there's a fourth one that I haven't played yet, but I've played the original three Uncharted games.
I could do a whole episode on the fourth one, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah. I have not seen the movie, but I honestly can't remember what the reaction was to the movie. I heard that it wasn't, again, it wasn't a direct adaptation of any of the original games. That it's supposed to be an origin story for Nathan Drake's character. Because Tom Holland, who plays Nathan Drake, he's supposed to be like a young kid Nathan Drake, and it's supposed to follow how he got started as a treasure hunter, explorer, expeditioner, all that fun stuff.
Well,
So,
I saw the Uncharted movie, and even though it's controversial, I actually liked it as a movie. I think it's an enjoyable movie to watch. Um, and I haven't seen like a lot of Tom Holland stuff besides Uncharted and Spider-Man. But in the Uncharted movie, he's enjoyable to watch in that movie just from a comedic standpoint and just a performance standpoint. Um, but the only problem you run into is when you try to compare it to the games themselves. Because even though
yeah.
Tom Holland was in his late 20s at the time of recording, he still has the appearance of someone who's like in their late teens or like early 20s. And we know that Nathan Drake in the game is supposed to be in like his mid 30s. So he does look a fair bit younger than Nathan Drake himself, but if you don't compare him to Nathan Drake and you're not expecting the characters to be carbon copies of one another, then it is an enjoyable movie in and of itself. I know that originally it was supposed to be Mark Wahlberg playing Drake, but the movie took so long to develop that he ended up playing Sully, which I think is
Oh,
actually kind of hilarious.
I kind of would have liked to have seen Mark Wahlberg as Nathan Drake, but you know, we got what we got, and I'm not mad because Tom Holland's a good actor.
Uh-huh.
He really is a good actor for somebody so young.
Uh-huh.
He's got some really good acting chops. So I'm not mad at Tom Holland. And like I said, I haven't seen the movie yet, and I would like to at some point.
Uh-huh.
But yeah.
The one
Um,
criticism I have is that in the games, the relationship between Nathan Drake and Sullivan was very wholesome because Nathan Drake was an orphan and Sullivan basically took him in and he was like a father figure to Drake. Um,
yeah.
and in the movies, they kind of changed that to where Sullivan is less of a father figure and more of a shady business partner that Drake struggles to trust. So that's kind of controversial, but you know.
That's a little strange. Unless it's just to highlight the fact that their relationship changes over time. I could see it being that way.
Yeah. But regardless, it's one of the examples of really good remakes. Another really good movie adaptation is the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah. Now, I haven't seen the Five Nights at Freddy's movies, and I don't play the games. I'm not a horror fan. As a rule, the only exceptions as far as video games goes, the only exceptions to horror that I make is if the story is really good, like really good, and if the gameplay is good. It's the only reason why The Last of Us is the only game in the horror video game franchise that I've ever played. And I don't regret it. The story's fantastic. And don't even ask me about the adaptation of The Last of Us. Hmm. Hmm.
In short, give your fans what they want, not what you think they want. You know, I think that it's time to just understand that people don't care about the larger picture. They don't care about the outside image of it. They don't care if a movie is modern enough or not. Like at the end of the day, 90% of people don't care about that. They just want to see what they want to see. And at the end of the day, movies and games and every other art form is about entertainment. So the priority should just be giving people what they want to see, or at the very least, letting the artists make what they want to make. You know, and not be tied to any sort of agenda or quota or sponsor requirements or things like that. Just free art, I guess.
Yeah. Free art.
Yeah.
Free. I agree.
Yeah.
All right.
But
Well, thank you to
thank
the
you
one
guys.
person. Thank you
Yeah.
to the one person who is tuning in and listening to us. Drop some suggestions in the comments if you want to hear us talk about anything, or if you want us to even elaborate on something that we've talked about in previous videos. And we'll catch
Yeah,
you next time.
and yeah, just continue to, get us some buzz, comment, subscribe, like the video. All right, well, thanks guys. We'll catch you next time.
Peace.